Hello, my friend. I'm Paul. Welcome to Night of Tales, a quiet refuge for imagination and dreams. Set aside your worries, as tonight we journey together through worlds of magic, mystery, and wonder. Lie back, relax, and let the tales carry you away. Tonight, our paths leads us into the ancient lands of Middle-earth. The key was heavy, forged of cold iron and spotted with the rust of neglect. It turned in the lock with a sound like a grinding stone, a harsh complaint against the silence of the blue mountains. Bifur pushed. The great stone door groaned. It swung inward, displacing air that had not moved in a generation. "Dark," Bofur said. He stood on the threshold, his wool collar pulled tight against his neck. He held a lantern high. The flame sputtered, then caught, casting long, dancing shadows against the hewn rock. And cold. Colder than the mountain outside. "It is a tomb," Bombur grumbled from behind. He was breathing heavily from the climb up the jagged stair. "A tomb for dust. Did grandfather truly live here? I see no hearth fire. I smell no roasting meat." "He lived here," Bifur said. He stepped inside. His boots rang on the flagstones. Before the sickness took the coin, before the slow years, they were the heirs. 3 dwarves of the Erdluin, not of the royal line of Durin, but proud enough in their own way. They had come to inspect their inheritance. The will had been clear, though the property was a mystery. The hall was large. Surprisingly so. It had been hewn in an era when copper was plentiful and the veins of the mountain were generous. The ceiling was lost in the gloom above, supported by pillars that looked like thick stone trees. But the grandeur was a ghost. Bifur walked to the nearest pillar. He ran a rough hand over the stone. He did not look at the carving, he looked at the crack running through the base. "Stress fracture," he murmured. He tapped it with his knuckles. The sound was hollow. The weight of the mountain presses hard here. The supports are tired. "Tired?" Bombur sighed, dropping his heavy pack onto a dust-sheeted bench. A cloud of gray motes rose into the lantern light. "I am tired. Is there a kitchen? Tell me there is a kitchen." "Should be there," Bofur said. He moved deeper into the room, the lantern swinging. "But do not hope for a stocked larder. The rats will have eaten the grain long ago." Bifur ignored them. He was an engineer by spirit, if not by trade. He saw the potential, and he saw the ruin. The floor was uneven, the slate tiles buckled by shifting earth. The air smelled of dry rot and old stone. It was a sad place. A place where a family had slowly faded away. "We cannot live here," Bifur stated. "To fix the roof, to shore up the pillars, we lack the gold. We lack the steel. Then we sell it," Bombur said, wandering toward the dark opening of a corridor. "Sell the stone. Sell the doors. Who would buy a broken hall in a depleted mine?" Bofur asked gently. He found a fireplace, a massive maw of soot-stained granite. He knelt, testing the flue. A cold draft blew down, carrying the scent of snow and pine from the surface vents. It draws well enough. We can have a fire, at least. They set up a temporary camp in the center of the great hall. It felt like camping in a cavern rather than a home. They laid out their bedrolls. They ate hardtack and dried mutton from their packs, chewing in the silence that the big room imposed on them. Bofur finished his meal and wiped his hands on his tunic. He was restless. The melancholy of the place sat heavy on him. He picked up his lantern and walked to the far wall. "There was furniture once," he said with his voice echoing. "Good wood. Oak from the valleys." He stopped before a massive shape hanging on the eastern wall. It was draped in layers of cobwebs so thick they looked like gray wool. It was a tapestry, vast and heavy. "Bifur," Bofur called softly. "Bring the broom." Bifur rose, leading his inspection of a crumbling table leg. He joined his cousin. Together, they looked at the gray veil. "Careful," Bifur warned. "The threads will be brittle." Bofur took the broom. Gently, with the reverence of a musician handling an instrument, he began to sweep. The dust rained down. The gray fell away. And from beneath the neglect, color began to bleed through. Deep reds, somber blues, the glint of silver thread that had not tarnished. "Maul's beard," Bombur whispered, stepping closer, a piece of hardtack forgotten in his hand. It was a map, but not a map on parchment. It was the heirloom, woven in wool and silk. It showed the peaks they knew, the valleys they traversed. But it was older. The names stitched in angular runes were archaic. Bofur raised the lantern higher. "Look, here is our peak. Here is the trade road." Bifur squinted. His eyes were sharp for detail. He traced a line of silver thread representing a river. He followed it south, past the known mines, past the settlements of the Longbeards. His finger stopped at a patch of dark green thread representing a forest. But in the center of the forest, woven in crimson and iron gray, stood a structure. "A castle?" Bifur asked. "There is no castle there. That is the Pine Hollow. It is wild land. Trees and wolves." "Not always," Bofur read the runes stitched beneath the crimson fortress. "Barastum, the Red Hold. Or, the Fortress of the Iron Horn." Bifur leaned in, his nose almost touching the fabric. The weave was exquisite. It depicted high towers, deep gates, and smoke rising from forges. It looked wealthy. It looked powerful. And it was sitting in a place that for the last 300 years had been nothing but an empty wilderness. The fire Bofur had built was small, a huddled orange beast in the vast black mouth of the fireplace. It crackled, spitting sparks that died on the cold hearthstone. Bifur sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by scrolls. The library of their grandfather was essentially a series of stone niches carved into the wall, stuffed with leather tubes and crumbling parchment. Most were ledgers, debts paid or sold, tools purchased. The mundane arithmetic of a dying house. But one scroll was different. It was wrapped in oilcloth. Barastum, Bifur read aloud. The sound of the ancient name felt heavy on his tongue. "Tell us," said Bombur, lying on his back on his bedroll, staring at the dark ceiling. "Was there a kitchen? Did they bake there?" "It was a trade post," Bifur corrected. He unrolled the parchment further. The ink was faded, brown as dried blood. Built in the late years of the Second Era, maintained into the Third. It was not a seat of kings, but a seat of merchants. A hub. Bofur played a soft, wandering melody on his clarinet. The notes floated up and dissolved in the shadows. "Merchants have gold," he murmured between breaths. "Merchants have goods," Bifur said. "Listen." The hold stood as the gateway to the south road. Here the iron of the mountains was exchanged for the silks and wines of the men of the south. Bombur sat up. The bedroll rustled. "Wines?" "Aye. And grain. And spices." Bifur adjusted his spectacles. But the record ends abruptly. 300 years ago. There is a final entry by the Castellan. He cleared his throat. The dwarven runes were hasty, scratched by a shaking hand. The air sickens. The vents bring up the yellow vapor from the deep earth. The miners cough blood. The birds fall from the sky. We leave. We leave this night. The gates are barred. We take only what can be carried on ponies. The heavy stores remain. May the wind clear the stone. Silence stretched in the hall. The heavy stores remain, Bofur repeated softly. He lowered his clarinet. They fled. In a panic. Panic makes for poor packers, Bombur noted. A gleam had entered his eye. It was not just greed, it was the sharp, painful hope of the poor. If they left the heavy things. "Gold is heavy," Bofur said. "Gold is carried first," Bifur countered, ever the pragmatist. "A dwarf fleeing for his life will drop his shield before he drops his purse. The gold is gone. The gems are gone. Then what remains?" Bombur asked, deflated. Bifur looked at the map again. He looked at the description of the trade routes. He thought of his own workshop, empty of metal. He thought of the leaking roof of this hall and the cost of copper sheets. "Metal," said Bifur. "Raw ingots. Lead. Copper. Fine silver for plating. Things too heavy for a pony running from poison mist. Things that rust and tarnish, but do not vanish. And wine," Bombur added. "Wine barrels are heavy. A dwarf cannot run with a hogshead on his back." Bifur nodded slowly. "Perhaps." "Is it safe?" Bofur asked. "The yellow vapor?" 300 years, Bifur shrugged. "The earth shifts. Vents close. The wind blows. If the poison remained, the forest on the map would be dead. but we know that forest. It is green. It is thick. They looked at each other in the firelight. 3 dwarves with a crumbling inheritance and empty pockets. It is a 3-day march, Bofur calculated, through the lower pass, into the timberlands. We have ropes, Bifur listed. We have pickaxes. We have the strength of our backs. And I have an empty stomach, Bombur grunted, standing up to pack his bag, which is the strongest motivation of all. The decision was made without a vote. The hall around them was too big, too broken, and too expensive. They needed a fortune to save their legacy. Or, at the very least, enough silver to fix the roof. The journey down from the high peaks was hard on the knees. The air grew thicker, richer, changing from the thin, cold ozone of the heights to the damp, loamy scent of the lowlands. For 2 days they marched. Bifur led, compass in hand, checking his bearings against the copy of the tapestry map he had sketched on a scrap of leather. Bofur walked in the middle, humming walking songs to keep the rhythm. Bombur brought up the rear, puffing, complaining about the roots that seemed to reach out specifically to snag his boots. On the 3rd day, the trees changed. The friendly oaks and beeches gave way to dark, towering firs and pines. The canopy closed overhead. The light turned a bruised, twilight blue. I do not like this, Bombur muttered. He slapped a mosquito on his neck. Dwarves belong under stone, not under wood. The trees, they watch. They're just trees, Bifur said, though he kept his hand near the hatchet at his belt. Keep moving. The coordinates are close. The forest was silent. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of holding one's breath. The ground was soft with a century of needleful muffling their heavy tread. Ferns grew waist-high, brushing against their mail shirts with a sound like whispering paper. Here, Bifur said, stopping abruptly. They stood in a clearing, or rather, a scar in the forest. The ground rippled with unnatural mounds covered in thick moss and brambles. Where is it? Bombur asked, spinning around. Where is the fortress? The towers? Bifur pointed. You are standing on it. Bombur looked down. He was standing on a ridge of gray stone that protruded from the earth like a broken tooth. Rubble, Bofur said, his voice flat with disappointment. It is all rubble. The castle of Barrisdoom was gone. Whatever disaster had struck, an earthquake, a collapse of the mines beneath, or perhaps just the slow, grinding weight of 300 winters. It had brought the high towers low. The majestic hold from the tapestry was a chaotic field of granite boulders and shattered slate. Nature had reclaimed it. Ivy strangled the stones. Birch saplings grew from the cracks in what was once a courtyard. Bombur sat down on mossy rock and put his head in his hands. For this, we walked 3 days for a pile of rocks. The gold would be buried, Bofur said, trying to sound hopeful, but failing. We cannot dig up a whole castle. Bifur did not sit. He dropped his pack and climbed the largest mound of debris. He moved like a mountain goat, testing footings, peering into crevices. He was looking for geometry. Chaos is natural, order is dwarven. He found it near the eastern edge of the ruin. Two massive stones had fallen together, forming a triangular gap. Beneath them, the darkness seemed deeper, cooler. "Bring the crowbars," Bifur shouted. The brothers scrambled up. Bifur pointed to the gap. "That is not a random fall," he explained, tracing the line of the rock. "That is a lintel, a headerstone for a great arch. It held while the walls above collapsed. The way down is blocked, but the structure holds." "The cellars," Bombur whispered, standing up. "The wine." "The heavy stores," Bofur corrected. They set to work. It was brutal labor. The sun filtered through the pine needles, dappling their sweating brows. They used the leverage of long iron bars. They used wedges. They grunted and strained, muscles corded, beards dusted with lichen and soil. With a grinding roar that sent a flock of crows scattering from the treetops, a massive slab shifted. It slid 2 feet to the left, revealing a black, square mouth. A puff of air escaped. It smelled stale, dry, and ancient. It smelled of cold stone and dead iron. But it did not smell of yellow poison. "The air is clear," Bifur judged, sniffing the draft. Bofur lit the lanterns. The yellow light barely penetrated the gloom below. A set of wide stairs, cut from the living rock, descended into the dark. They were untouched by the ruin above. "Well," Bofur said, adjusting his grip on his mattock, "we came for a castle. We found a hole." "A hole is a home to a dwarf," Bombur said, and for the first time in days, he smiled. "After you, brother." The stairs went down deep. Dwarves do not build shallow basements. The transition was immediate and stark. One moment, they were in a humid, noisy forest. The next, they were in the absolute, silent chill of the underworld. The boots of the three kin echoed sharply. They emerged into a wide antechamber. The ceiling here was intact, a perfect barrel vault of interlocking bricks. The collapse above had been absorbed by layers of earth and rock, leaving the deep roots of the fortress protected. Bofur swept his lantern around. Shadows leaped and stretched. The guard room, Bifur identified. Racks of rusted iron stood against the walls. Spears, once bright and sharp, were now sticks of orange corrosion. They crumbled at a touch. A table lay overturned, a rotting playing board scattered across the floor. It spoke of a sudden departure, just as the scroll had said. "Nothing of value here," Bombur said, kicking a pile of reddish dust that used to be a shield. "Rust and rot." "Deeper," Bifur commanded. They moved through a heavy archway. The air grew cooler still. They passed through what was once a scullery. Huge copper cauldrons sat in rows, green with verdigris. "Copper," Bofur noted. "That is worth something." "Too bulky," Bifur said. "We cannot drag a cauldron through the forest. We need density." We need the vault." They found the blast doors at the end of the main corridor. They were made of iron-bound oak, swollen with age but solid. They were barred from the outside, a sign that the fleeing dwarves had tried to secure their wealth before running. The lifting of the bar took all three of them. It was a log of petrified wood, heavy as lead. When it finally clattered to the floor, the sound was like a thunderclap in the confined space. Bifur pushed the doors. They screamed on dry hinges, opening only a foot or two. It was enough. They slipped inside sideways. This was the trade vault. It was vast, its roof supported by squat, thick pillars of granite. And it was full. Crates, barrels, stacks of timber that had turned to gray dust, piles of woolen bales that had disintegrated into mounds of fluff. "Search," Bifur said with his voice tight. They spread out. Bofur checked the crates near the door. Pottery. Beautiful, painted urns from the south, now mostly cracked by the damp or time. Worthless. Bombur went straight for the barrels lined up against the far wall. They were stone, not wood. Dwarven stoneware, sealed with wax and clay. Bifur walked to the center of the room. There were low pallets there, groaning under the weight of canvas-covered shapes. He pulled back a rotting tarp. He stared. He did not blink. "Bofur," he called. His voice was calm, but it vibrated. "Bring the light." Bofur hurried over. The lantern light fell on the pallet. Dull gray bars. Ugly, heavy, unassuming. "Lead?" Bofur asked. "There are tons here," Bifur said. "Enough to plate the gates of Erebor. Enough to buy the Blue Mountains twice over." From the back of the room, a sound came. A pop, followed by a hiss, and then a heavy sigh. "Brothers." Bombur's voice was wet with emotion. "Come. You must smell this." Bifur and Bofur left the silver and hurried to the back wall. Bombur was kneeling before one of the stone casks. He had used a chisel to crack the wax seal of the bomb. The smell hit them before they reached him. It was not just the smell of wine. It was a heavy, intoxicating perfume. It smelled of summer sun, of crushed berries, of spice and heat. It was thick, almost visible in the air. "Dorwinian," Bofur whispered. "The fire wine." "Look," Bombur said, holding up a tin cup he had filled from the cask. The liquid poured like oil. It was not running like water, it was a syrup. Dark ruby red, almost black in the center. Over 300 years, the water had slowly evaporated through the microscopic pores of the stone and clay, leaving behind a concentrate of alcohol, sugar, and flavor. "It is a cordial now," Bombur said reverently. He took a sip. His eyes widened. He shuddered. "By Maul, it is like drinking liquid fire and velvet." "Valuable?" Bifur asked, eyeing the cask. "A bottle of this would sell for a bag of golden dale," Bombur said. "The Elven King would trade his crown for a cask." Bifur looked around the vault. Tons of silver, casks of ancient wine syrup. It was the fortune they had dreamed of. And then the vault groaned. It was a deep, resonating sound like the stomach of the earth rumbling. Dust trickled down from the ceiling in a fine curtain. Bifur looked up sharply. His engineer's eyes narrowed. The doors, we forced them. We broke the seal of air pressure. And we moved the rubble above to get in. A spiderweb fracture appeared on the nearest pillar. The weight of the collapsed castle above was shifting. The equilibrium that had held for 3 centuries was broken. The lintel is failing. Bifur's voice was no longer calm. It was the voice of command. We have destabilized the entry. We must load the packs. Bombur cried, scrambling to his feet, hugging the stone cask. Quickly. No, Bifur screamed, listen. Another groan, louder this time. A stone the size of a melon fell from the ceiling and shattered on the floor, 10 feet away. The integrity is gone, Bifur shouted. The ceiling is coming down. Not in hours. Now. They looked at the treasure. The stacks of silver. The rows of wine. We cannot carry it, Bofur said with panic rising in his chest. It is too heavy. We cannot run with lead ingots. We take what we can, Bombur argued. He grabbed the stone cask. He grunted, his face turning red. He lifted it, but his knees buckled. It weighed as much as a full-grown dwarf. He could waddle with it, but he could not run. Boom! A section of the far wall collapsed. Earth and rock spilled into the vault. Leave the cask, Bifur yelled. He grabbed a smaller wooden keg that sat on a shelf, likely a sampler. He threw it to Bofur. Take that. Bifur grabbed a coil of the silver sheet. It was heavy, biting into his fingers. He threw a second coil to Bombur. But the rest? Bombur wailed, looking at the fortune they were leaving. Life is heavier than gold. Bifur grabbed Bombur by the shoulder and shoved him toward the door. Run. The escape was a blur of dust and noise. They scrambled through the blast doors just as a massive slab of the vault ceiling slammed down onto the pallets of silver, burying them forever. The wind of the collapse pushed them forward, blowing out their lanterns. They ran in the dark, guided only by memory and the distant gray light of the exit. Up the stairs, the stone shaking under their boots. The roar of the collapsing voids below chasing them like a hungry beast. They burst out of the hole in the rubble, gasping, coughing, tumbling onto the pine needles of the forest floor. Behind them, the mount of ruins shifted. The lintel stone, the triangular gap they had cleared, ground its teeth and sank. The earth swallowed the entrance. With a final, muffled thump, the way to the cellars of Barad-dûr was sealed. Silence returned to the forest. The birds, startled by the noise, slowly began to chirp again. Bifur lay on his back, staring at the canopy of pine branches. His chest heaved. His hands were black with dirt. We lost it, Bombur wheezed. He was sitting up, clutching the coil of silver sheet to his chest like a child. We lost it all. Bofur sat up. He checked the small wooden keg he had saved. It was intact. Not all, Bofur said. 2 weeks later, the great hall of their grandfather was still cold, but it was no longer silent. A roaring fire burned in the hearth. The chimney had been swept and repaired. The smoke drew perfectly, carrying the heat into the room. Bifur stood by the window. He was polishing a new set of tools, fine chisels and hammers bought from the ironmongers in the valley. The roof was patched. The worst of the cracks in the pillars had been shored up with strong oak beams and iron bands. The silver sheets they had carried, just 2 coils, had been incredibly pure. The sale of 1 coil to the smiths in the Blue Mountains had brought enough coin to repair the hall and stock the larder for 2 years. The second coil Bifur kept. He would use it to make toys. Beautiful, mechanical toys plated in silver. He had ideas. Bombur sat at the table. It was no longer dusty. It was set with a roast chicken, a loaf of fresh, dark bread, and cheese. It is a shame, Bombur said, though his mouth was full. Ideally, I would have liked the big cask. Ideally, Bofur said, we would be dead under a mountain. Bofur placed 3 small crystal glasses on the table. He tapped the small wooden keg. This is the sampler, Bofur said. It is the same vintage. 300 years of patience. He poured. The liquid was thick, dark, and syrupy. It moved like honey. Bifur came to the table. He sat down. The chair did not creak. He had fixed the leg. They raised their glasses. To the iron horn, Bifur said. To the heavy things, Bofur added. To home, Bombur finished. They drank. The flavor blossomed in their mouths. It was warmth. It was the memory of a summer sun that had shone 3 centuries ago, trapped in a grape, saved in the dark, and released now in the safety of their own hall. It tasted of berries, of smoke, and of comfort. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside the thick stone walls, but it could not get in. They were dwarves of the mountain. They had a house. They had full bellies. And they had a fire. And that, for tonight, was enough. Bifur closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of the fire. The house was safe. The work was done. Sleep came easily to the hall of the 3 kin.